Hi, this is Andrew Sears. I'm the president of City Vision University. And in this session, I'm going to talk about what the Wounded Healers Program of Holistic Christian Recovery is. So expanding on the last lesson, one of the points of this course in this program is to expand your circle of control. And in doing that, that's a big part of what this course is about. And so I'm going to talk about what are the components of expanding your circle of control and what the opposite of that is. So I'm going to start talking about a downward spiral of addiction. So I myself have a recovery background, and what happens is our life, whenever we're in addiction, our life is getting smaller and smaller, and we're kind of going down this descending path to hell. So that's what this little diagram looks like. So, and you may start off with trauma and family issues, and you have, and I'm showing this diagram that getting smaller and smaller. So you have trauma, abuse, maybe PTSD. And then that might drive things, where the rest of your life you kind of have this continued or increased exposure to trauma, attraction to toxic relationships. That was a big one for me. And then having toxic relational habits that keep you trapped in relationships with unsafe people. And then, this trauma might drive things like shame, poor self-worth, I deserve bad things, or I deserve the things that are happening to me. Basically not seeing yourself how God sees you. And you have these toxic core beliefs and a worldview of an addict, and we'll unpack that a little more later in the course. And then, the trauma and these thoughts and just that background can result in emotional outburst and impulsivity. And then, in what these are all components that we're trying to train you in the course. So right now I'm going to be showing you what the opposite of that. So, having these emotional outbursts cuts off healthy people. Healthy people may not hang out with someone who's doing these things. So safe people avoid you, only left with toxic people. The only jobs available often are toxic. And only living in an environment available is toxic. Living at a flop house or something along those lines, and avoiding God and in church out of shame. One of the toxic beliefs I had is if you mess up, you're supposed to avoid God. But that really isn't biblical. In the Bible, Jesus, wanted those who were wounded and broken. And leaving churches from conflict and emotional outbursts. So, I did a lot of the patterns in this, what I'm describing here early before I entered recovery. And then, your physical health also can be destroyed. So chemical addictions destroy physical health, toxic relationships, the stress from them destroy health. You don't have time or money to invest in health. Shame devalues investing in yourself. Friends and family might model poor physical health. I grew up in one of the unhealthiest parts of the country, and that's just how it was. And we took pride in how unhealthy we were. And increased mental health issues, an addictive pull. And I never realized how much my physical health was causing me to have a stronger addictive pull later. And then, this shame and poor self-worth, shame devalues boundaries and self-care. So then exposed to a lot of high-risk relationships and situations, those, relationships, the man or the type of women who are bad for you or that you're attracted to. Or those friends you shouldn't hang out with because they're going to get you to do things you shouldn't be doing. So continued exposure to temptation. And then what happens is all your personal margin or all your personal resources, or what I'm calling this personal capacity for recovery, it leaks, out through addictions and other ways. And then you have increased stress, and then that decreases your employability. So you aren't able to work on skills. You may not have as much reliability. You may have emotional outbursts, and then you get stuck in the worst jobs. And what happens is this becomes a cycle where it gets worse and worse because you're surrounding yourself with more and more toxic relationships, and your life keeps getting smaller and smaller. So what is this course about? This course is about reversing that cycle. And you could call this a personal capacity for recovery. I like to call it an upward spiral of Christian recovery. To put that in Christian terms, you could call it salvation, discipleship, recovery, and sanctification. And the idea is you want to be expanding this circle. So, whenever you talk about the serenity prayer, change the things I can change, you want to expand the circle as you go through it to expand that circle of things you can change. So starting off and what you're trying to do is get an upward spiral, right? So you have trauma and family issues, and this is basically the map of this course. But I'll talk specifically about how we cover this course, but I want to talk about what does it look like for recovery. So I started my own recovery in 1996. I hit rock bottom and I said a prayer to God. I said, God, you either have to help me or kill me because I can't live like this. I didn't even know if God was out there, and God showed up, and it's been 28 years now, and I've done a lot of these steps. So I'm using some of my own personal examples here, but I'm also, I've been in relationship with hundreds of people in recovery and seen what they've done. So, and this is what happens over decades, but what you're trying to get is this positive spiral. So, I show trauma up here first, but part of the reason for that is because early, whenever I started my recovery, I was driven and I was a workaholic, and that tied in with other addictions. But I thought, okay, I have a few issues. I know I need to go to counseling, but I can cram just like I did for everything else in my life, and I can get this done in 3 months max. And that's like someone who is in this catastrophic car accident with, their bones broken, in multiple places in their legs, saying, oh, well, I'll be able to go through rehabilitation much more quickly than the average person because I'm going to run more. And that's essentially what I did. Is I tried to go really fast in processing my stuff, and attempting trauma processing without safe relationships risk relapse, or just keeping you traumatized. Where I started to get a lot of progress is where I got a baseline of safety in my life. I got a healthy home, healthy living situation, healthy work environment. And then it was whenever I had that, then I was able to effectively process the trauma in individual and group counseling, where it actually brought healing. I was processing. I went to recovery groups and counseling for about 15 years. And for many of those years, I was processing this stuff, but the trauma was still alive, probably for about a decade. And the reason why it was still alive, it's like the person who has the broken bones and you keep running on them. You have to wait and get the safety. So, but what I found is as I got healing for that, I had decreased emotional, let's just say volatility. Okay, yeah, so that's volatility. And what I found is I had, decreased emotional volatility and health issues. So anger issues got a lot better. That also helped reestablish healthy core beliefs and self-image in my own process. And for a lot of people, that is helpful. So for each of these, what I want to do is what's the main point you got to remember on these in the upward spiral of Christian recovery. So I want to have kind of like the headline. So safety first, then processing. If you read books on recovering from trauma, that's one of the biggest things. Managing thoughts, I would say the headline there is really Philippians 4:8. So that's, where the Bible says, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on those things. So, for me and for a lot of people, worship songs with positive messages, a lot of the worship songs I listen to are about what God thinks of me to help kind of reprogram my mind from, these other things, and also just about safety and different things. Journaling to correct toxic thoughts, learning my own identity, other people, learning your identity. We have our vocation, calling, and purpose of work course that can be really helpful to understand, there's some things I'm good at, some things I'm not good at. And that's just a healthy way of understanding the world rather than just saying, I'm bad or, I'm all good. Counseling and 12-step programs for what's called cognitive distortions, listening to sermons with positive messages, memorizing scripture and studying the Bible for positive messages. And, as you do each of these steps over time, they kind of build and they give you more energy, and this, the resources you have to devote to your recovery start to expand. And then as you have these, heal some of the toxic worldview, on this and way of viewing the world. One negative way is that people are dangerous and the world's unsafe. So, and as you deal with trauma, that can help. And then that helps with managing emotions. And here the real analogy I like is the pressure cooker and having a steam release. If you have a pressure cooker, you can go on YouTube and you can watch videos of pressure cookers exploding. That's what often happens if you don't have a steam release and you just keep it cooking and cooking. So for a lot of people, daily worship and prayer is an emotional release. And journaling is an emotional release. Talking to friends and a counselor or some sort of group is an emotional release. Reduce stress from self-care, exercise, and nutrition. We'll talk about DBT skills that you can develop. Mindfulness and distress tolerance are some specific ones. And then the next area is healthy relationships. And so over time you kind of develop these skills, and this is what happened to me. Over a decade, I'd get a little better at some of these things, and then the next decade I'd get it even more better, and each year get a little bit better. So attending church, a small group, a recovery group. Initially in my recovery, I avoided dating a lot of people. That can be good to do, because often our addictions get tied in, and relationships can keep us from making progress for a while. Learning to have platonic or non-romantic cross-gender friendships, to know what that healthy cross-gender relationships can look like, and friendships, living in work environment with safe people, just trying to get as many safe people as you can around there. A big part of it's learning to be a good friend, or if you are married or dating, or want to date, become a good romantic partner. Books, podcasts, videos on healthy relationships, attending healthy relationship classes, and ultimately, engaging with dating, marriage, and restoration of relationships. So these can all be steps that help. Then on the physical health, there's a program in one of the courses we use. It's called the Daniel Plan. Really, it's the template that I'd recommend for people because it's kind of comprehensive. So implement the Daniel Plan and physical self-care. At one point I had a conversion experience on physical health and realized that I had treated my body horribly for the first 35, 40 years of my life, and it was having huge impact on me. And recognizing how that ties in with recovery. So, and then a big part of that's establishing routines for healthy cooking and exercise, getting books, podcasts, video, and on physical health, learning how physical health impacts other domains. That was really the motivator for me, was that, once I started to make these changes in my physical health, I had learned to be sober, but I always had a strong addictive pull. And I just thought, that's my biology. That's just this, set temperature of my thermostat, is I'm always going to have a strong addictive pull. Then I made dramatic changes in my nutrition and my exercise. That pull went away. And I just thought, I didn't even think this was possible. So, that's not always going to be the case for people, but that helps. Having supportive friends on physical health, regular medical care to optimize health, and psychiatric medication as needed. Now, if you're early in recovery, you got to be really careful about this, because a lot of people will, find a psychiatrist that will prescribe them things that essentially you're continuing to abuse, you're continuing to have dependence, or you're using medication to avoid these other things. Some people just think, doctor, just give me a pill so I don't have to do all this other stuff. There's a lot of things on this list to do, right? And a pill is not going to fix it all. So then you have boundaries and self-care. So, there it's just having, if you have these healthy core beliefs that come from, your thoughts and, healing trauma and things along those lines, then they will result in self-care. If you're not doing self-care well, then that kind of by definition is you don't have healthy self-belief. So, I and many other people have to learn to stop trying to rescue others, limit stress from other commitments, resisting toxic beliefs that limit self-care. A lot of that can even be related to ministry. I should be always giving out more than I take in, ending friendships with toxic or high-risk people. So this learning to balance giving out and taking in, one big part of discovering your own identity. A lot of people think, oh, well, this is discovering what I'm good at and not good at. But a big part of it is learning how you uniquely de-stress and do self-care. That's very different for different people. And for myself, that was a huge part of learning my own recovery was, what are the things that are most effective for me on that? And then establishing firm routines that keep your cup full. So you have these self-care habits, and you just have to establish them as habits, and then they just keep your cup full. I used to, have times where I'd have, minor relapses or things along those lines. And I was just like, how do I not do that? Well, I started to have routines. I go run and pray every single morning, almost no matter what. And in doing that, I'm filling up my cup every day. And then I started having other routines. So, and then the relapse risk went away, from that. So that's how self-care helps. And then this is for a lot of our students, one that honestly can easily be overlooked: working hard for resources for these other domains. So making progress on all these things requires resources. It requires money. It requires time. It requires being able to get housing, getting a job that is, healthy. And so, often you'll start at an entry level, high stress, high risk job. And then, you want to move beyond that. So, to get to something better, so developing personal financial management skills so you have financial margin. For some people, you have to rehabilitate your own work ethic. And really there's two problems. I mean, people who have an addiction background, it's all or nothing, right? So it's either usually what I find is people either have the overachiever problem or the underachiever problem. If you're on the underachiever problem, you need to rehab your work ethic to get a strong work ethic. If you have an overachiever problem, you need to be focusing on this self-care space. Avoiding work conflict. What happens is people end up in worse jobs, or they can't get promoted because their supervisors. A lot of supervisors are intuitive, and they know that that someone might be inherently risky, so they don't want to, promote someone. So ultimately, what you're trying to do, and part of how you avoid that is this other quadrant. You get healthy relationships around you. You're good at managing your emotions. You have a good, positive worldview. You're not paranoid about everyone, and you're not distrustful of everyone. You have, good physical health, and you have good boundaries and self-care. All those things will help you avoid work conflict. They will also help you contribute, to become an exemplary employee, because you're going to go into work with, your cup semi-full. And part of what you're trying to do is to get a better degree or trade skill. You can do that, all of that at CityVision, or you can start at CityVision, just get the life skills you want and then go somewhere else. But what you're trying to do is improve your marketability as an employee. And you're trying to move into positions with better pay and less risk to your own relapse. In the long term, we want you to be able to move into leadership as you have more margin. So let me tie this in with how this course, I mentioned this is the outline of this course, but I wanted you to have a vision of, if you can do all these components, this is like a 28-year journey of a lot of things I've done in my own life. And for a lot of people who've been in recovery, it doesn't happen overnight. But what you're trying to do is expand this influence. And then, suddenly you have more money, so you can live in a healthier work environment, and you can, also live in a healthier community. I lived in the hood, and I couldn't go run because it just wasn't safe where I lived, and that affected my ability to exercise and things along those lines. So how this course in CityVision supports a holistic recovery plan. So week 1 and 2 of the course is focused on processing trauma and family issues and taking proactive steps towards recovery. Ultimately, you're going to do this mostly through groups and counseling. We're not your counselor, right? But we do have courses that help with that. So this course can help with that a little bit. This is kind of like an intro, what's called a survey. But we also have a course, Family Issues and Recovery, that helps you process your own family issues in addition to learning to counsel other people. Then managing thoughts, support groups and counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy, learning to have healthy core beliefs and Christian worldview, and a lot of City Vision's theology and counseling courses. But this is material we're going to cover in week 3 of this course. And then in week 4 of this course, we're going to be covering managing emotions. So dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT therapy. So we have courses like emotional intelligence and ministry and management that it's focused on managing emotions and healthy relationships. Most City Vision counseling courses are going to be helpful in this space. And, also again, support groups and counseling. And then in week 5, we're going to talk about healthy relationships and support networks and, seeking healthy relationships, attending church and small groups, attending recovery groups, individual counseling, and trying to get a healthy living situation and work environment. For a lot of people, that's honestly the most challenging thing. They might be, my work's safe, my church is safe, but my home environment's crazy. And that, can be challenging, navigating that, or sometimes, work's super stressful. So how do you move to a different position within your work environment or get a different, work environment? Physical health. So we have this course, Holistic Personal Health, that I mentioned uses the Daniel Plan, getting a personal health plan, getting healthy diet and exercise. And then in week 7 is about boundaries and self-care. So we have this course, Technology, Life Balance, and Addictions. And then this job, financial health, and career marketability, we have a lot of courses there. So Ministry 101, that's really a big part of that, a life plan. Addiction Counseling 101 and Org 101, you're developing a career plan. We have our personal finance course, job and internship search strategies. There the skills are healthy financial management, getting a highly marketable career skill and character, and ultimately what you're trying to do is finish your degree, certificate and degree. So, how this course and how City Vision supports a holistic recovery plan. One question is, where's the Christian components in this? Well, there's a lot of these, church, a lot of these courses that I mentioned have Christian components in them, small groups. But the reality is, we're trying to integrate that throughout this. So it's kind of baked in. Now, one other thing I want to show you kind of in this diagram is in these different quadrants. So whenever I say holistic, what I mean is a lot of recovery will only focus on one of these domains. So holistic means trying to cover all these different domains, right? But one thing that's important to recognize on these domains, there's certain domains that really help you get more resources. So if you have more money, if you're doing more self-care, if you're doing a better job of taking care of your physical health, and you have more healthy relationships, that's going to give you more resources to actually do the work. So the work might be processing past trauma and family issues, managing your thoughts, managing your emotions. And you got to avoid sabotaging these things, because what you're trying to do is build up your resources so that you can do these things. Because a lot of people are like, okay, I got to, not think negative thoughts, control my emotion. But honestly, that's one of the more difficult parts of this. But you do have more control in this domain. And if you're, keeping your cup full, so your cup, as the Bible says, my cup runneth over, or at least my cup's mostly full, then you're going to be doing a lot better on these things. So many of you have seen the addiction cycle, and I want to talk about how that relates to this course. So you have an emotional trigger. Often that can be stress. It could be hanging out with, friends. It could be having conflict, or, whatever it is an emotional trigger. And then that creates a craving, an unmet need. You might see an ad that, if you're drinking, you see a beer commercial or something like that, creates a craving, an unmet need. And then that creates a ritual where you're like, okay, I may walk by the liquor store but not go in, or, if it's a food addiction, you start thinking about food, and then, you buy the food, and then you use, and then you have guilt and shame, and then that adds to your stress, right? So how do you break that down, and what role does this course have? And many of you have been through programs that talk about this, but I want to talk about specifically how this course is helping you deal with this. So the trauma and relational patterns that we're going to deal with in week 2, that helps drive a lot of the emotional triggers and the stress. In week 3, the negative thoughts, this guilt and shame that drives these emotional triggers. That's where this week 3 is in thought management of the course. This, what's called emotional dysregulation, not being able to manage your emotions as well as you'd like. So that's what we're going to cover in week 4. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to put stop signs in here, right? So you got, weeks 1 and 2, processing the past, managing thoughts, managing emotions, and then you got healthy relationships, physical health, boundaries, and self-care. And all these things can end the addiction cycle. Now, that's another framework. I want to show you one other framework that I think is helpful to understand how this course is designed and how our approach to holistic recovery. So this is how universities are typically organized, and in particular in this course, how Christian universities are organized. But all universities are going to be organized into these departments. And you're going to have, this is more individual topics or subjects, more collective focused subjects, and then things that are focused more internal or more subjective, or more external and more objective. So let me just show you some topics. So this is quadrant 1, and this is more the personal nurture. This is what's called humanities and social sciences, physical nature, science and technology. So that's, external from you, and it is more objective, cultural, and then social or social sciences. So here, if you look at big universities, what are their departments? They have humanities departments, Western theology, ministry, counseling, psychology, and I'm going to separate art for self from performance art. And then you have, in the physical, you have biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, medicine, psychiatry, healthcare, life sciences, nutrition, and exercise sciences. Then you have cultural, gender, cultural studies, anthropology, ethics, non-Western religions that are more collectively focused, music and worship and performance art. And then on the societal, you kind of have the micro level that's organizational and business management, which are, departments we have, microeconomics, macro. But you start to move up to, sociology, law, politics. This is how a whole country works, history, ecology. And, a Christian university is trying to interpret all these disciplines through the lens of a Christian worldview. Now, here's the key thing to understand in academic approaches to recovery, because most people are trained at academic institutions, and academic institutions have their own bias. What they're biased towards is their bias really is, if you go back to these different circles, the circle of control, the circle of influence, the circle of concern, most academic teaching is going to be focused on facts, and that's often in the circle of concern. So, coming back to this model, there's so you can use this model to think about what are the causes of addiction, to get a holistic understanding of the causes of addiction. So this is where the power of this model is. I'm not just trying to be nerdy, but this can be a tool to look at different quadrants. So, on this first quadrant, so, unemployment, not having strong emotional intelligence, personal isolation and broken relationships, spiritual emptiness, separation from God, effects of wounds from abuse, effects of trauma from the past. So, counseling, psychology, a lot of those things, these are all personal, things that you can understand. If you're unemployed, you're going to be exposed to a lot unhealthy environments, and that might increase your risk for addiction. And then you have other causes. So, there's easy access to drugs and addiction, lack of physical care of our bodies, biochemistry of addiction, hereditary disposition, the biophysical, emotional predisposition towards addiction. And then you can look at cultural. So, we live in a society that devalues emotion, spiritual relationships. There's subcultures. I worked at a Burger King where everyone was on drugs. It was just normal. 100% of the people there at this Burger King was on drugs, and about 80% were dealing. And a lot of people come from cultures like that. Cultures where alcohol, drugs, sex, food, and materialism are promoted in the mass media. There's different forms of cultural oppression, racism, cultural inheritance from past oppression. A lot of people who come from oppressed groups that have higher rates of addiction, and that's some of the cultural inheritance. And in our society, we have things like the worship of sex or hedonism or other gods that permeate our culture. And then you have societal breakdown of families, lack of jobs, systemic oppression, political priorities, economics of drug trade, global exploitation, failed states, governments, and the globalization of crime. Now, you just look at all these topics, and if you're like, okay, I'm just going to become a master of all these topics, how much is that going to help you in your own recovery? Well, academics, this would be like an academic map of all the causes of addiction. Now, here's what's important on this map. One is to recognize, there's a lot of factors that contribute, right? So, a big part of the fentanyl problem right now is about the conflict between China and the United States. And that actually impacts, and the number of deaths have dramatically gone up as China, when in the years whenever China wasn't cooperative with the United States on making sure that some of the chemicals that go into Mexico to make fentanyl, they were providing those to Mexico. Now that's stopped, and that's actually going to drive some of that down. But that's interesting. But what's important is to recognize, going back to this circle of concern, things you cannot change. So most academic understanding of causes are in the circle of concern. So interesting to learn about, but not really going to help you in your own recovery. So what does a 4-quadrant holistic plan for self-care and recovery look like? So if these are the causes, what are the potential solutions? So here, getting a job in a healthy work environment, going to counseling or life coaching, developing healthy friendships, deepen your personal identity, establish physical and emotional safety, pursuing spiritual fulfillment, getting healing from wounds of abuse and trauma, getting connected to God, and avoiding behavioral addictions. Then here, and this would be like the typical Christian group, like, okay, these are going to be the things. Why this is important is these factors are also significant this is kind of the holistic part. You got to start thinking about eating healthy, exercising regularly, going to the doctor, getting regular checkups, getting needed medical treatments, getting psychiatric treatments. And I put in this that are needed without abuse, because as I mentioned before, a lot of people who have addiction background can, use some of those medications with abuse, or to also deal with other, quadrants. Taking healthy vitamins and supplements. And I guess I have that listed twice. And removing access to the addictive item. And, many of you know the acronym HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. A lot of those relate to the physical part of you. So especially the hungry, lonely, and tired, but often the angry is related to those. So that's on the physical side. Then cultural, you need to surround yourself with a healthy culture. So finding a healthy church and small group that values things, avoiding subcultures where addiction is a norm, avoiding triggering tech and media use, participating in healthy recovery or counseling groups. And for cultural minorities, finding positive groups where you can be in your own culture. And society, working diligently to improve your resources and social location. So that's, your employment prospects, your housing, your financial margin, resources for self-care. And, a lot of times one of the traps, and later I'll talk about this, is social justice addiction, where, you're so focused on fixing the world and creating systemic change. And you read all these books that say, you got to focus on changing the system, but that can become really a form of codependency. And I got caught in that myself. And ultimately you only are going to advocate for systemic change in healthy ways as you have the personal margin to avoid that codependency and social justice addiction. So that's a map. Now, using this map again, how does City Vision courses help you develop across all 4 quadrants? So we got Bible and theology courses. So that's going to be focused on this quadrant, or vocation, calling, and purpose of work. Then we have our addiction counseling courses. So that's, wounded healers, family issues and recovery, maybe sexual issues and addiction, and really all of our addiction counseling, that's in this quadrant. Then over here, our main course we have in this quadrant is holistic personal health and spirituality. I'd like to have more courses there, but the students we've had go through that have said it's been really life-changing, so I'd encourage you to take that. Then we have other courses: technology, life balance, and addiction. A lot of people will move from chemical addictions to behavioral addictions. And course is really to help people avoid that. Cross-cultural management and different cross-cultural courses and organizational health courses. How do you create a healthy org culture? So that we have several courses on that. And then here, personal finance. What you're trying to do here is how do you kind of move up and how do you increase your own resources? But nonprofit and business management courses and all courses and degrees that can help improve your employment prospects. So that's kind of the holistic part. Now let me talk about what really is in the Wounded Healers. So what does it mean to be in the Wounded Healers program? So one part is in the course. Now you could take this course and not be in the program. But the way we define someone in the program is if you're in this course and you're a graduate of a residential recovery program in the past 3 years, then you're in our Wounded Healers program, kind of by definition. Now, if you still want to be in it and you don't meet this other definition, we'd be glad to put you in that. So what does that mean? So we have certificate and degree programs, and we're developing some certificates specifically for this audience. We're developing life skills courses, and you're going to focus probably a little more on life skills. You kind of chart your own course, though. But we're also going to provide you added support. And we will work with our ministry partners, for those that are connected with ministry partners, to provide added aftercare support. So last year in 2023, I'm recording this in 2024, last year, we had 101 students in this. So we've had 46 ministry partners. We have really good employment rate. A lot of that, though, is because a lot of our students who've gone through this have been employed in ministries. The graduation rate, we want to improve that. And really where we fit here is, we have students who, they were experiencing addiction, homelessness, and or imprisonment. They go into a partner residential recovery or reentry program. Then they go to City Vision's Wounded Healers program. And a lot of times we'll be engaging with a student for 8 years as they go to, say, if you're part-time for a bachelor's degree, and we're helping you get that, long-term stable employment, housing, and sobriety. So, what are the certificates? So we have 7 certificates currently. We're going to be trying to add more: addiction counseling, nonprofit management, business administration, Christian ministry, nonprofit fundraising. And, we just added retail management and food services. So let me just use an example. As I mentioned, I worked at a Burger King that everyone was on drugs. Half or more than half the people were dealing drugs. And a lot of entry level, food services positions are like that. It's just, they're almost as bad as living in a flop house. So how do you move up? Well, if you work there, you work diligently, and then you get a food services management certificate, that's going to help your job prospects, right? The same type of thing if you're working in retail. Now, we have these life skills courses. So vocation, calling, and purpose of work is about developing a life plan, understanding your identity. It helps reform your worldview. We talk about positive thinking. It helps there too. The Wounded Healers course, that's this course. Emotional intelligence is about healthy emotions. Personal finance, holistic personal health and spirituality. I've talked about family issues, recovery, and technology, life balance, and addiction. So what we want to do is provide you with all these different components so that you can succeed. You can decide which and when do you want to take these various courses, but we want you to understand how they fit together. And you also have this sense, I mentioned in the first week, we kind of have this Jewish approach of, circular. It's not linear learning and growth. It's circular. So even these different dimensions that I've shown you in this session, there's different frameworks to explain what does it mean to be holistic. But what we're trying to do is to give you kind of a map that you can use over, the next few months, the next few years, the next few decades, and expanding your overall, process. In Christian circles, the Christianese term for that sanctification. But what, the recovery, approach would be, how do you expand your capacity for recovery? And that's really what we're trying to help you do. So we have great faculty in this course. So if you have questions, ask your faculty and share with others in the course on what you think would be helpful for you out of this. Thanks a lot.